Hello and welcome to the Two Man Power Trip of Wrestling. I'm your host, JP. John Paz with me today, musician, singer, record producer, vocalist, guitarist, legendary man from the band Rancid. Of course, you'll know Mr. Lars Frederiksen. Lars, welcome to the Two Man Power Trip. How you doing?
Super excited to be here. Love this show.
What have you been up to? What's going on in your world?
Ah, there's so much. I think I did this solo record thing. I was out on tour on that for a while. I did some touring with the Last Resort, another band, an English band I've been playing in and joined about 4 years ago. And now I'm just kind of like getting rid of my stuff.
Hmm.
uh, Seems like I just have so many things. When I kind of realized it, I was like, man, I got a lot of stuff, and I need to get rid of some of it because this is getting to be like hoarder status.
Yes, yes. I was
So
funny. I was just talking to a buddy of mine, and we were saying, about Rancid and stuff. I was like, oh, I'm going to be talking to Lars. And he said, he loves the Bastards, all this other stuff. But then he goes, wait a second. He goes, how come he doesn't do more with like wrestling themes? And how come? And I was like, yeah, you know what? It's like I'm going to ask him that. Like the first thing I'm going to ask him is, I'm so interested. Like, you have a music guy who loves wrestling. Have they ever reached out to you? Like, hey, can you do our theme songs? You can do our
nope,
themes.
no. The first and only time was Ruby Soho. And that happened because, maybe I do a wrestling podcast with my friend Dennis Farrell called The Wrestling Perspective.
Yep.
And we've had all kinds of guests on there. And she was one of them. It was actually her first interview after the WWE had released her. She knew that she wanted to kind of keep going. And as we started talking, the conversation started to kind of, get a little bit more in depth. She's like, yeah, but I can't, I got to change my name. And I said, well, it's freaking, she likes Ruby. So it's like, let's do this. And she's like, do you think so? And I was like, well, I know some guys. I think we can work it out. And she's such a great talent. So it seemed like, it was the obvious thing to do. And that was like the first time, I think. I mean, there has been wrestlers on the indie scene that have come out to Bastard songs. And I'm not quite sure about Rancid songs, but I definitely know Bastard songs. I know Sterling James Keenan used to come out to one. What was the other guy? I forget his name. He was another indie guy. But and Sterling James Keenan, as you know, became even, yeah. So and then but it was always like CM Punk would be wearing a Lars Frederiksen and the Bastards shirt, or you would see somebody doing that, and that was probably the closest thing I got to it. As far as like writing a song, Ruby Soho is the first thing. I've offered my services to a few people, but it didn't seem like they wanted to work. So I was like, okay, that's all good. And then me and a few guys from, I don't want to get into that because it still can happen. And I don't want to
Right.
I never really talk about it because I'm very superstitious. So like, once I feel like I talk about something, it either happens or it just falls flat on its face. So I just try to keep it here for a little bit.
To me, it's like, wow, punk rock, you wrestling, like, it's hand in
It
hand.
makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense. I mean, and I would always wonder, like when they would be playing a song of some of my peers or whatever, and I look around the stadium and I wouldn't see them there, and I'd be like, dude, the dude's here. Like, you know what I mean? At a baseball game and you're hearing, another band and you're just like, I'm coming here like 20 games a season. Like, how about do one of our songs?
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
it is what it is. It's all fun and games.
When you did give her Ruby Soho and give her the song, do you like give that to her as like ownership? Does she lease it from you? To Tony Khan, AEW lease? Like, how does that work out?
Well, yeah, we just signed a deal with them so they could use it, at their discretion. As far as like, we own the song, obviously, because we
Right.
own our back catalog. So, I mean, the idea was just like, okay, but as long as you're, wrestling under this moniker, you get to use the song. I mean, it's pretty much how it works. I mean, it's a lot more in depth, and it doesn't need to be, I mean, it's like, I don't want to go into
Right,
the
right. We don't need to go into the minutia.
no, no,
I was just
because
curious. I'm
there's a
like, I wonder
lot,
if they
because
lease it
I
to,
mean,
lease it
once
out.
you say again, sorry.
I was just curious if like they lease it out or like how that works when they
Yeah,
use like
yeah,
real
they're like,
music.
Yeah, it's a licensing deal. It's like any kind of thing, you know what I mean? It's like if your music is being publicly broadcasted, you know, you need permission, obviously. And but I mean, we got a great working relationship with AEW as far as when Ruby Soho. So it was like a match made in heaven, you know. And Tony Khan was on, you know, I was an old wrestling trader and on the boards and stuff like that. And there
Me
was
too.
a wrestling board called Death Valley Driver, and so it's like that's where, you know, I met a lot of like Phil Schneider and Will Helmick and Rob Naylor and a lot of these guys that like we used to trade tapes, and that's where I would find out about different kinds of matches. And Tony was there, you know, but he was a young kid. But it's kind of amazing to see, you know, here's this supreme uber wrestling fan now running a wrestling company. It's actually kind of cool to see, you know.
It's funny. I was on that board too. I know Phil. I used to love Dustin of the Day. Remember, he used to always
Oh,
write about Dustin Rhodes.
oh yeah, of course. I got. Have you had? Do you have Phil's book?
Yes, Way of the Blade. Yes,
Yes.
it's behind me somewhere, probably directly
Well,
behind me. Yeah.
you know what? It's behind. That's right here. So let's give Phil a little plug. Way of the
Yeah,
Blade.
Way of the Blade. Awesome book. Talks about the greatest bloody matches of all time. I think he's working on another one because I talked to him recently. He said he was going to work on a second one. So,
Yeah,
uh,
you know, I've sent copies to a lot of my friends. I sent a copy to MJF. I sent a Dave LaGreca, who's the co-host of Busted Open. Me and him are pretty good friends, and he went and bought the book too. And it's just like it's one of the things that I love about wrestling, and especially older wrestling fans, and it's because it's all about, you know, there's so much love for it. It's not like choosing a side, weird, you know, politics. It's almost like politics in wrestling, right?
yeah,
It's like, you know, AEW, it's just fucking enjoy it. You know what I mean? But it's great when you meet other wrestling fans, and because it's a community, you know, especially the way I came up with through the boards and through tape trading and stuff like that. There wasn't a lot of us. It was just like punk rock. So, you know, when you got into punk rock as a kid, you really wanted to be there, you know, because you had to deal with cops, you had to deal with jocks, you had to deal with, you know, society, whatever it was. So, and I felt like wrestling was kind of the same thing. It's, you know, because it had such a stigma on it, obviously, over the years. It's fake, it's, you know, it's stupid, it's lowbrow entertainment, blah, 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 blah. So I feel like when you find that kinship with other wrestling fans, you know, who are around the same age or whatever, you kind of have a different appreciation, and it's a community, like I said, that is so accepting. You know what I mean? And I like that part about it. You know, being a wrestling fan. As far as like this whole like who's better and what company's this and all the wrestling dirt sheet, it's fucking it's it's kind of ridiculous because some of these dirt sheets, if the audacity to call themselves reporters, it's a joke to me. You know what I mean?
yeah, they're not really media. Hey, you're on a
No,
website.
I
Yeah,
mean
yeah.
it's like what are you actually reporting? You're getting a phone call from some stooge, right? That's what you're
Usually,
reporting.
yeah,
Yeah. So it's like you're not. It's like real reporters, real journalists actually go out and they formulate a story. You know, you're basically just getting something fed, and then you're going, you know, from the phone call to the computer and out into the world, and that's it's kind of why the world's kind of fucked up as it is, right? I mean,
yep.
it's just like there's no investigation. You know, there's no because the truth is always going to be there, but it's like even if you know, you're kind of skimming it and bringing out a story that's maybe not 100% true, it's still, you know, sort of amplifying, you know, a bunch of falsehoods, and it's just ridiculous to me. But that's a whole other thing. But
Yeah. It's funny, like with wrestling, I've got friends of mine like 30 plus years, and I think about it, like, how did we become friends, or what's like the base of the relationship? Usually it's wrestling, and we still can talk wrestling then, now, and talk about the old stuff, talk about the new stuff, who we like, who don't like. But it's funny, it's like, wow, I don't know if I would be friends with these guys if we didn't both like wrestling. And I always think about that.
well, you know, there are some friends like that I have too. I mean, there's guys that I still communicate with. You know, a lot of the guys from like the tape trading days, and we're still in touch. We know each other's families. We've stayed at each other's houses. Um, you know, but a lot of the relationships that I've formed through this, I think are going to be lifetime relationships, just because, you know, there's always that, you know, baseline of understanding, you know. And I feel like a wrestling fan, you know, it is, you know, I think that there's the real wrestling fan, the guy that's watching it every week, and maybe this is just my experience. It's a very cerebral thing, right? Because you're trying to follow the story, you're trying to get emotionally connected, and you have to turn the light switch off, right? Because you want to believe. It's that suspension of disbelief, right? And I think that other wrestling fans who've been, watching it for years have this ability to turn the light switch off. Right then and there, you have a commonality, and I think that's probably why wrestling fans are so passionate.
Man, are they passionate? Like you said with the tape trading stuff, me and my buddy would be like obsessed with like what you want. Like, oh, have you ever seen Mike Awesome versus Masato Tanaka? But no, not the ECW stuff, the FMW. Like, and then you try to get the whole compilation because the guys would put it together, which is
Yeah,
awesome that they would do that. And then obviously you buy it or you trade it or and that some of the guys flat out just sell you and they would make copies. But that was such a great way to like learn about wrestling. But it's not just one thing or one part about wrestling because you could like Mike Awesome and Tanaka, but I love Hogan, which is completely different. So there's
right.
so many different things in wrestling, but you could like so many different things. Such a cool medium, such a cool different sport, if you will.
Yeah, well, there's so many, different kinds of styles. Just in Japan, I when we go over there on tour, and I had a tattoo shop over there at one point. I think I went to like a big Japan show, a New Japan show, an All Japan show, and an Osaka Pro show, and a Hustle show, like
Wow.
all in like a 3 week period. You know what I mean? So I saw like six different promotions, and and it was all different kinds of styles, but yet it was all the entertainment value was all on the same par. Does that make sense?
Yes,
And I've
absolutely.
always loved the death matches, and I actually did this one thing with Jun Kasai. I guess it would have been about 12 or 13 years ago now, but we did um, like a T-shirt together and a couple autograph signings together when I was over there. And because I always loved the deathmatch stuff and the Japanese stuff. Like it started with obviously with FMW and Cactus Jack and Terry Funk put it on the map, right? But you had guys like Onita, and stuff like that. And that's what I found out about a lot of that through the boards, right? So this is where you would get the information. I mean, I had seen New Japan stuff, I had seen All Japan stuff, and that was pretty much the only thing that was actually really sort of somewhat easy to get. But like some more of the underground stuff was always a little bit harder, and the deathmatch stuff was always kind of the hardest in good quality, anyways. Because this is back in the days of VCR tapes, right? So you always had a squiggly line, and you're trying to adjust the tracking.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
it's a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, and I feel like once DVDs came in, that's when you actually saw. I remember getting this FMW comp on DVD, and it came from some first generation tapes, and I was like, I finally saw the match. You know what I mean? It's like it's not just little glimpses of of certain aspects of it. But even with the squiggly lines, you could follow the story, and it's funny because it's in a completely different language, and you could still be able to follow the story. And that's just a testament to these guys as workers, right? That can bring you in, even though you don't know what the buildup is, because it's the promos are in Japanese and whatever it is, and but they could bring you into this story and kind of take you onto this journey with them, and it would all obviously culminate in an explosion or barbed wire or I just remember that Sheik match when they lit the ring on fire, and
Yes.
just I was just how is that possibly in any way, shape, or form safe? So, but it's just that kind of stuff. So that you would always, I garnered a lot of respect for those performers, and being a performer myself, I think, not to the, I'm not going into burning rings or anything like that, but I think there's like a common respect as a performer, that you have, and I've always kind of looked up to pro wrestlers to begin with because of, what they put their bodies through, and it's the travel. There's so many, parallel sort of the existence is as far as like being on a road or, on tour or whatever. The parallels are right there, between all performers, professional athletes.
You'll love this. I think it was 2 months ago. I went down to Philly. Onita was there for a match. He was wrestling. I think he was wrestling Bubba Ray Dudley in a tag match. I think it was him and Leatherface. But I got to interview him. His wife was there, and so she did the. He knows a little bit of English, but she did most of the kind of going between us. So I have an interview with him. It was awesome. I was like, "Oh, this is so cool! Like, who would have thought?" And then he said to me, because I was like, "What's your legacy?" Whatever. He goes, "You came here." He goes, "You know me from Japan." He goes, "You came here. I flew 2,000 miles. You drove, what'd you say, an hour?" So yeah, I drove an hour to get here. He goes, and I'm famous from 30 years ago. It's always funny, kind of like when you think about it, you're like, wow, that's right. You're Japanese. I'm coming to meet you, basically of stuff you did in your past. But like, I'm desperate to talk to you and ask you all these crazy questions. But it was awesome getting to talk to him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've had the opportunity to, I remember one time because my dude was always Masawa, right?
Hmm.
And I mean, you know, as far as like those the Japanese guys, like I always loved Masawa, Kawada, Timon, Honda. But I remember we were over there on tour. We were at Kurikan Hall, and it was for a Noah show. And I had a tiger mask, the second tiger mask with me, and I really wanted to get it signed by Masawa. And you know, I was with Tim and somebody else, and we're at Kurikan, and so of course, I got the spiky hair. This back in 2000, might have been about 2003, 2004, and of course we stand out like sore thumbs. And I remember this woman came out and she said, I guess Timon Honda recognized who we were, and we have a friend of ours, 296 over there. He's like a ring guy and works a lot of the Japanese shows. Long story short, word gets back to Masawa, and this lady comes out and says, and this is before the main event. So Masawa wants to meet you. And I'm like, what? Yes, but he doesn't speak any English. So I'm like, okay. And so we go in the back and, we talk to him. We meet, a few of the other guys. He signs my tiger mask. And then he says, "It's really nice to meet you," like in perfect English. And I kind of looked at that and I said, "I thought you said he didn't speak English." And then they rushed us out. But the fact that I was able to get an opportunity to meet him and talk to him and kind of tell him, and get pictures with them and stuff like that. It was a big moment, for me, as a wrestling fan, and I think about your Anita story, and it's like just, being in, all, what, 6,000 miles away from a country, enjoying what these guys do as professionals and artists, I think, and then you're sat next to them. It's kind of a strange trip, you know what I mean? Because the only time that you've ever had any connection was through this, two-dimensional box, right?
Yep. So
So
interesting. When Ring of Honor brought Masawa, Kobashi, different periods of time, I purposely would go to the show and then wait till after it was over and meet them, get their autographs and stuff. I love that because it's like, holy shit, they were actually here in the U.S. Like Kobashi wrestling Samoa Joe, Masawa was wrestling Kenta and stuff. So I was like, man, it's just awesome to be able to meet those guys, and that's cool as hell. That he might have kayfabed you a little bit. He knew some English.
yeah. Well, I remember Mike Modest, who was a local wrestler around
Oh
here.
yeah,
Yeah, and he wrestled for Noah, and he wrestled for WCW there at the end.
and
I
Ring
think
of Honor
Kevin's.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, I did a loop with Mike at one point. It was just a California indie kind of thing because it was APW, so it's when Roland was still alive, and uh, he did an event called Pro Wrestling Iron, and this was in the summertime of shit. I can't even remember what year it would have been, but I think that was Masawa's very first North American appearance, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong. He might have been come over before, but it was an incredible show. Because you're in the middle of Vacaville. I think it was in Vacaville, California, if I remember correctly. And I know that there's a DVD of it out there somewhere, but I remember that they called it Pro Wrestling Iron. And so you witness these, like, a lot of these indie guys that I go and see now, especially guys like Vinny Massaro or name escapes me, but like I saw these guys first match, and now they're like, and I've seen them rise from the indies. Will Hobbs was another guy, like watching him when he was Will Power, and seeing a lot of these guys work the indies. Swerve, another dude I saw 100 times, and then now they're taking that next step into like, the TV world, and they're just custom made for it. And you kind of have a sense of like, pride in a weird way, because you see them when they first begin, and you see over time how they work it out, and they learn their craft, and then all of a sudden, a lot of these guys are naturals to begin with, but to see them at that level is a pretty cool thing.
Oh, absolutely. Here in New Jersey with Northeast, so many guys like that. It's like, wow, I remember him when watching him younger. And then even when all the Ring of Honor shows would come through, and we were talking about early 2000s, mid 2000s would come through, AJ Styles, Low-Key, Brian Danielson, Nigel McGuinness, all these awesome guys that you look back like, man, these guys are all unbelievable. Love all
I
these guys.
saw I saw AJ Styles versus Smart Bart Sawyer in Marietta, Georgia at an NWA show in 1996. And I remember I was doing the Antiheroes record, and we had a couple days off, and I talked Mark Noah, the singer, into taking me to go see the NWA like 3 hours away or whatever. And there it was. And just in the most backwoods place, and seeing AJ Styles perform. And then next thing you know, you see him on TNA and stuff like that. But I remember it was AJ Styles and Smart Bart Sawyer. And I think the Amazing Red might have even been on that show as well.
It's awesome. Like when you look back, like who made it, who didn't,
Well, I
and just
remember
seeing like their progression.
it was the show was on the day that Rick Rude passed away. So that will tell you the time and the date. So that could have been 97, right? I don't remember.
99, I think he died. I'm pretty
No,
sure.
no,
No?
no,
Before that?
no. It was because I was in Atlanta, Georgia, doing the Antiheroes record, and that was 96 or 97 latest.
I'm trying to remember when
We'd have to fact check.
Yeah, but I know he was in WCW in 98 though, Rick Rude, so he was still alive. I thought he died in 99, I thought, or maybe 98.
Maybe it could have been 98 too, but or I could just have my wires crossed. I mean, I feel like sometimes I've forgotten more about professional wrestling than I can remember. You know what I mean? So I could be wrong as well.
How did you kind of fall in love with wrestling? Like, how does that happen for you?
Well, getting into punk rock, and like I said, kind of feeling like, sort of, like my story is, I was pretty much ostracized from all my friends. There was a guy who, by the name of Sean Gregonis, who brought punk rock to the street, right? And next door to him was a guy by the name of Andy Finney. And Andy Finney was from Detroit, Michigan. And he used to go to Cobo Hall, see the Sheik and all that. And every Saturday, Sunday, there'd be wrestling on his TV. And he would have the local wrestling, well, the California wrestling. So you'd see guys like Pat Patterson, Tony Atlas, Rocky Johnson. It was at it was from maybe some of the TVs were from the Olympic Auditorium. So I think it was big time wrestling. Excuse me. And I would go over to his house and I would watch it with him, and he would break it down. And he had a shit ton of magazines. I think it was there were some PWIs, but there was also Inside Wrestling or Pro Wrestling Inside. One I can't remember, but I remember it had the apartment wrestling, some of those segments in the magazines. And I just remember falling in love with the pageantry. So it's like, you kind of see it, and it's this spectacle, and it's just like, it's real heat. I think Roddy Piper was but I remember it was Rocky Johnson and Tony Atlas were a tag team. And I just, that's where I was just like, whoa, these guys are badass, because, physical condition, their bodies were insane. They moved so fluidly. I always loved watching Roddy Piper, of course. I think there was, I'm trying to think who else would have been around there. But then we had the AWA. That was the thing about California. Before cable TV, we had the AWA, we had Big Time Wrestling, and we had, it could have been Polynesian Pacific. I don't remember. But the point is that I just kind of fell in love with it because I loved the escapism of it. I always loved music for that reason too. So when I saw these guys kind of, and they were larger than life superheroes, but they were also like, fighters. And growing up where I grew up, you had to kind of be a fighter too. So I feel like I just kind of related to them, in a lot of ways. So that's kind of what I opened the floodgates. And then once cable TV happened and you started getting the WWF programming and the NWA programming and stuff like that, then I remember on Saturdays in the 80s, 86, 87, maybe, you would have Bill Watts' territory. You would have Glow. You would have WWF, AWA. You'd have World Class. I mean, there were so many, you know what I mean, promotions to choose from. And now, like the magazines, you didn't have to just, follow the stories through the magazines. Now it was like, here's on your TV. Now I finally got to watch the Sheep Herders or,
Yeah.
Hacksaw Jim Duggan or, Fabulous Freebirds or, whoever it was, now I could see it for the first time. So I'm sort of happy that cable TV happened, because it kind of, you know, it kind of put the voices because I didn't hear the Michael Hayes cut a promo until Mid-South. You know what I mean? It's like, or you would read about the one man gang and then there he is. So it's like, it was pretty crazy, but I loved it all. It was like, I just loved it. Can't explain why.
Punk rock and wrestling again, they kind of go hand in hand in a lot of ways. Did you go to the Olympic Auditorium and Cow Palace? Did you go to like all those venues or no?
I've been to the Olympic Auditorium, but not for. I went to one XPW. I went to one wrestling show, and that was an XPW show at the Olympic. But I went to the Olympic for punk rock,
Oh,
So, but the Cow Palace, yes, my first ever wrestling show was at the Cow Palace, and the headliner was Piper Orton, Tonga Kid, and no, it was Tonga Kid versus Piper. That main event. But Orndorff had the cast and Snuka. It was supposed to be Snuka, Tonga Kid versus. It's one of the earliest ones I remember, but I do remember that match because I don't know, man. I've seen so much,
but
you know.
that's awesome in that era of seeing those guys. I mean, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, it was exciting. The Cow Palace was a great venue too, and then later go there when Punk was in town. He was doing the program with the Taker, and or getting to that place, and it was a house show, and it was the Straight Edge Society against like Jericho, and Punk starts a riot in that place. I mean, that guy had so much heat. He's like the greatest babyface and the greatest heel all in one. But he was a bad guy at the time. And literally, there's a video of it on YouTube. And it's like, and my buddy Kevin Gill, who I was with, who does a lot of commentary for GCW.
Yep.
We were together and we're sitting next to each other. And we were watching it unfold. I remember Kevin got out his phone and recorded it all. And it's on YouTube. But it was literally like that you could cut the tension in there with a knife. So the Cow Palace has always been a great place to see wrestling. The crowds are always hot there.
And it just seems like such a legendary venue as you like look at the history of the business, like happening. And then WCW would run the Cow Palace a lot, so it's like
Yeah.
wow, a lot of good stuff in the Cow Palace. How is the Punker doing? I know obviously there's like so many things out there, rumors. I mean, and then nobody's talking stuff. You still buddies with him? You guys are still close?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We're super close. Yeah, he's doing good. He's healing. He's getting getting better. So that's good news.
Definitely. With you and wrestling, you mentioned to me kind of often when we were talking about Kiss. And to me, I feel like wrestling stole some things from Kiss, like as far as like the merchandising. But maybe Vince McMahon or something maybe loved Kiss, maybe or supposedly didn't know who they were. But I have a feeling he looked at Gene Simmons was like, I like what he's doing. I'm gonna make dolls. I'm gonna make shirts. You know what I mean? Like I feel like a lot of Kiss is wrestling Kit and wrestling is Kiss.
Well, put it this way: Vince McMahon's favorite band is AC/DC,
Yeah,
and he's from New York City. And you must have been under a fucking rock by the core of the center of the earth in the 70s not to have heard of Kiss, right? I
right.
mean, they were the biggest thing. They were bigger than, sliced bread. I mean, let's just be honest. They were everywhere. and they were the kings of that merchandising, right? So it would only make logical sense for you to draw the conclusion that Vince McMahon learned some things from Gene, Paul, Peter, and Ace. Probably more Gene and Paul, but whatever. But yeah, I mean, I think that Kiss and that sort of spectacle, and then but you got to give a lot of credit to the whole success of the WWF at the time to Cyndi Lauper, for Christ's sake, and MTV, because that brought that into a whole different realm. I remember when that all went down, and I had been watching wrestling for a couple of years by then, and then all of a sudden, like, kids at school wanted to talk to me about it, and before 6 months later, they're making fun of me for watching it, right? And I remember thinking that it was like the first time I felt like somebody took something away from me. You know what I mean? Because now it hit the mainstream. But at the same time, in the same token, when I look back, that didn't last for very long. I just got more friends. But, you have to, give her credit. It's funny because you got some of these guys in the Hall of Fame that maybe showed up to a wrestling event once, and then you have Cyndi Lauper, who needs to be in the Hall of Fame, because she's pretty much part of the reason why the WWF at the time, WWE now, obviously, is where it is. Let's just be honest. So, Cyndi for the WWE Hall of Fame.
Surprised she's not in there, right? Surprised she's not in there.
It's insane to me. It's insane. I don't know why that is. I mean, she took bumps. I mean, Piper kicked her in the face. Like, I wouldn't even do that. I have been a wrestling manager, though, and I have stepped foot in the ring, and I have promoted a show before in my lifetime. But I don't want to take a bump. Maybe 20 years ago, yeah, but not now.
Well, I didn't realize that you were actually promoted a show. Was it in California?
Yeah, it was in Nevada, and our headliner was Generico versus because he was still in ROH, because he did a fly-in. We took a lot of the indie guys, me and Kevin Gill. We promoted the show, and we found this casino in Reno, and they gave us the ballroom. And it's actually funny. We paid all the boys, and we made money on top of it, which was crazy to think about for your first show.
Yep.
But yeah, we promoted it, and we wrote it, and we produced it, and I think it's filmed somewhere. It might be still on film, but because we did something else. First time I ever did commentary was with Kevin Gill. We did this DVD for the Super Riz Cup, fuck, I haven't thought about this in a long time. So you're pulling some stuff out. So I'm sorry if I'm the hamster wheels is still kind of warming up in this area, but yeah, we promoted the show. I think we had the Reno Scum were on it, or at least it wasn't. Maybe it doesn't matter. Long story short, I was a manager. my wrestler was a guy by the name of the Millwall Brawl. It was a total squash Bundy SD Jones kind of match, and I cut a promo. I was a heel manager. But we had a great time, you know what I mean? And it was real fun.
That's pretty cool, promoting. Like, you're really invested in the business. You're promoting and putting on shows.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like, that's just probably as far as I want to get into it now. Now I'm kind of like, I would love to be so much more involved in pro wrestling. Like, I would definitely want to be part of it. I think I would have a lot to offer. But at the same time, it's like one of those things. I don't know if I could be as physical as I would want to be, in a role. You know what I'm saying? So, and I don't think you should put me behind the camera. I think I need to be in front of it. So,
damn right.
Anyway,
any like future plans to do anything or be further involved? I know we were kind of saying before, like, oh, maybe we should do some theme songs, but like anything else as far as like in wrestling besides podcasting and stuff, like actually like performing, managing?
I mean, I've never been really given the opportunity, honestly. Like, no one's really ever called me and asked me. I mean, that's the thing. I would love to obviously do something in that, of course. Like I said, I think I would have a lot to offer. I just don't know if there's, I don't know what that would be. But, of course, I feel like anything that you put your mind to, you can manifest. But yeah, I would love that. I would love to be part of that. I mean, I've always said no, but now as I'm getting older and I'm kind of like, you know, just kind of, I don't know. My mind's changing around it. Like, just having the experience that we did on the AEW pay-per-view and playing and stuff like that. That was definitely like a bucket list thing for me. I played Madison Square Garden and I always wanted to play MSG because of the Morocco snooker match, right? And I used to watch WWF programming and it would always be from Madison Square Garden. But that match in particular, I should say, is the reason why I wanted to play Madison Square Garden, and I got to do that. So that was like a thing. So I feel like for me, like anything at this point is going to be gravy. I'm just not a very I don't know if that business, I think I would be, I don't necessarily know if I would be able to handle the shit. Like I don't think I could, I wouldn't try to deflate somebody's ego. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know if I would be great in public relations. How about that? I probably wouldn't be a good agent because I'd probably, I'm the type of guy it's like, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm already killing my career before I start, but I think yeah, I would love to, but I think the musical realm would be sick. But as a performer or something like that, hey, you never know.
Few things that stick out to me about Snuka and Morocco. Morocco wins. Everybody assumes Snuka Morocco wins that match, but obviously Snuka gets the revenge. But also, Backlund is the champ at that point. Snook is the number one babyface by far. So it's so interesting with like what was going on in that time period. WWF, but Snook is the number one guy. Technically lost the match, but everybody kind of remembers the dive off the cage.
Well, but that's the thing. It's like, you don't really remember. I don't really remember WrestleMania, 3 from the Hogan Andre. I remember it's Steamboat and Macho Man. And it's like, that's what I remember about that show. So there's so many things, that you feel like, the main events were almost secondary to something else that happened. And you're right. I mean, that was such a transitional time for the WWF because I mean, sooner, not too long later, they get a guy by the name of Hulk Hogan that they steal from the AWA, right?
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, Mean Gene comes, and then the Killer Bees, and so on and so on and so forth. The rest is history.
It is crazy. I love, obviously, I got all my Hogan posters. I'm 40, so that's right around the area, like the mid 80s when I started watching it. And he came along. So, he's like a godlike figure. Who was your guy, though? Who was like the guy that you loved back when you were young?
Well, I think where a real affinity, I mean, it's a good question because it's been different guys over the years, right? So, for instance, I'll just say that like Ultimate Warrior was a guy I knew who was just all show and muscles, and I don't necessarily know could have wrestled his way out of a wet paper bag, and I saw that at the time, but now as a 51-year-old man, I love that dude, right? Bret Hart probably would be my number one, him and the Undertaker, but Bret Hart for sure. It's kind of like, what's your favorite band? Well, some days it's Motorhead, some days it's GBH, and it's like it's always 51-49. You know what I mean? So, but Bret Hart, I think most consistently has been my guy. I remember when him and Neidhart, I just loved that tag team. I loved the way that they worked off each other. I was always a tag team guy, but the NWA was always where I feel like the real shit went down. So I loved Dusty. I loved Magnum. I loved Flair. Nikita Koloff. I loved the Road Warriors. I mean, there's so many to mention. And I would say CM Punk. I mean, it's not just, I'm not just saying that because we're close. It's like I love the way that the guy performs. I love his persona. I love how honest he is. I love how he tells a story in that ring. I think that's kind of a lost art now. You know, I feel like you see a lot of this indie-rific kind of pro wrestling, which is fine. It's got its place. But when it's a whole card of you know, I remember I was watching AEW one time, and I can't remember what match it was, but I remember it was still when they were doing it in Jacksonville, Daily Plaza or whatever it was. Is it Daily
Daily
Plaza?
Place. Daily Place.
Daily Place. Sorry, Daily Plaza is where Kennedy got killed, I think. But um, either way, it might have Moxley might have been in the match, but I remember like there was all this boom, 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 and then the guy goes through the table, and then gets right up and goes in the ring and starts running the ropes. And I was thinking to myself, dude, you just went through a table. How do you get right up and then start running the ropes? Like, it doesn't make any freaking sense. It's like, I like spot fests. I think they have their place. But it's like when you're trying to tell a story and capture me emotionally, there has to be some substance to the story that you're telling. And when you're going through a table and then 5 seconds later you're running the ropes, you're basically telling me that was a bullshit. What's the point of the table, right? So, and that's the kind of stuff I see, right? And it's hard for me not to see. And that's what is sort of annoying about pro wrestling. But then at the same time, I do like those types of matches, especially live when you got, it's very like fast and quick and well set up. I mean, it's good. It's fun. It's like lucha stuff, right? But for me, it's always about the guys who could tell the story. Like Ric Flair could get in that ring and tell the story with, anyone with a broomstick, as they would say. And he could do it for 60 minutes straight, right?
Yep.
And then you guys got guys like Dusty Rhodes. I love the Four Horsemen. That was like my all-time, and I know it's a lot of people's all-time favorite faction. I loved J.J. Dillon in his role, and I loved Ole and Arn. I always saw it as a band, right? It's like you think you got Ric Flair. He's your fucking badass front man, right? He's your David Lee Roth.
Yep.
You got Ole and Arn, who are kind of like the rhythm section, right? The bass player and the drummer. And they're good. They're solid. They're not Ric Flair, but they're definitely, they can handle themselves. And you're only as good as your rhythm section in a band, as your bass player and your drummer. And then you got Tully Blanchard, who's like the crazy guitar player, right? He's in the middle between Ole and Arn, as far as like, even with his promo, his appearance, his personality. So that's why it worked, because you had Ole, who was kind of the drummer, Arn, who's kind of like the bass player, Tully, who's the guitar player, and then you got your rock star Ric Flair, David Lee Roth. And then you got J.J. Dillon, right, who kind of is the glue that brings it all in. And I'm a super fan of J.J. Dillon. And I always wanted to talk to him, just to interview him. He's like one of those guys that I really want to talk to, him and Barry Windham. But like, I think that's where I always gravitated. I always loved the guys with the valets, whether it been gorgeous Jimmy Garvin or Macho Man and Elizabeth, of course. I always loved that dynamic between them, So there's so many that play a part, but like Sting was another guy that like I didn't really, like. Well, I can't say I didn't really like. I didn't really understand at first, but then watching that, when him and Flair got and did that match, I was like, okay, this guy's real. He's the real deal. And so I think over time I fall in love with more with a character or somebody more. Like I said, I have a totally different view about the Ultimate Warrior now than I did, let's say, 25 years ago, 30 years ago.
Great way to put it. Never heard that before about the Horsemen. That is perfect. Almost like the perfect analogy there for them. Yeah, you're right.
Well, I feel like when you got like these stables, like, whether it be the Freebirds or the Horsemen or, the Road Warriors with Precious Paul, it's like you know, there is something that there's something that's bigger than life, right? And with the Horsemen in particular, with the band thing, and even like with Kevin Sullivan and like you know, and Purple Haze and Woman and you know, it's like you kind of can see how this is all being played off, you know, in a way it's put together like a band would be put together, because you know, you need these sort of instruments to make this band, right? And it's the same kind of, I think, ideology. It's like, well, this person has this job and this person has this job and this, you know. So but I feel like the Horsemen were the Kiss of professional wrestling easily.
Funny nowadays with the factions, I don't have that feeling anymore. Like you're saying, like the perfectly, it's just like they throw all the guys together. They could be the same exact person, but they're in the faction. It's terrible. I hate it. It's too many factions.
Oh, I agree. I mean, and you see why the like things like the Straight Edge Society worked, right? You see why that worked.
Yep.
And it was almost like a nod to Kevin Sullivan, what he did in Florida.
Yes.
Same thing. It's a nod to it. It was totally completely different. It wasn't devil worshiping. It was being straight edge and drug free, right? But it's the same thing, right?
Yep.
It's just it's presented in a completely different level, but the psychology is there. And that's the one thing that I think in some promotions it's gone. It's lost. It's now become like it's no longer about a story, it's more about performance art. I see the business kind of going back to this storytelling by the guys that they're hiring. But you take a guy like MJF, who basically puts himself over every time he steps in front of a camera. And this kid is so smart. I don't mean to call him a kid, but you know what I mean.
Yep.
And he's such a nice, well, I shouldn't say that either. But here's a talent that has taken the business to the next level. He's this generation's Ric Flair. He's this generation's Roddy Piper. I think he's more like Piper because he's got a little bit more grit to him than Flair. And I always thought Piper always had way more grit to him than Flair. I feel Flair is a badass. I'm sure he could handle himself or whatever. He's just cried too much on TV for me. So, but which is not bad. You should show your emotions. I'm just saying, comparatively, Roddy Piper was probably the greatest heel that we've ever seen in our lifetime, easily. I genuinely thought he was the biggest asshole, but yet the coolest guy at the same time. You know what I mean? And would be able to physically back that up. And he was such a great heel. And I think MJF is more shades to that. And I really feel like that kid is the future. And it would be a shame to not see him be he is the face of any company, in my opinion, easily.
I love it. Even recently, he comes out, he cuts a promo. You're like, all right, I'm going to watch this, or I'm not fast forwarding through this. Like anytime he's on, he's must see.
Exactly. And I think, you know, there's not a lot of people you can say that about. I mean, Cody Rhodes leaving the AEW was probably the best thing that he ever could have done. As soon as he stepped foot in the WWE, I was like, all right, I'll check it out. And then all of a sudden, like, because I loved the Stardust Goldust tag team. I mean, I know it only lasted a cup of coffee. Hold on. This is how much I love it. My buddy Hal Haney did this for me.
Oh yeah, he's awesome. Yeah, he does good stuff. That's a cool tell. Yeah.
Yeah. So I love that tag team. You know, because I feel like Rock and Roll Express, Midnight Express, Road Warriors, you know, those are the teams. I just always loved tag team wrestling. But where were we? We were talking about Goldust and Stardust and Cody Rhodes. I loved that whole thing, even though it lasted only a cup of coffee. I still loved it. It made an impression to me. I fell in love with wrestling again because of that team, right? I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And then it was gone away. And I just hate that Crash Course TV shit. I just hate it. It's like, remember when Angles used to last a year? And it's like, you know, because there was psychology behind it. That's what keeps you engaged. I think that you can still do that. So, but watching Cody Rhodes, all of a sudden I was emotionally invested again. And uh, watching, then he's like tears his muscle, gets in the cage and does this. I mean, I was like, whoa, I was blown away. And it was only a matter of time. And I'm super glad, he took that step to go to the WWE, because I feel like, the way that their style of wrestling is so, the story is there, the timing is there, the professionalism is there. It's not like the AEW product, which is a little bit more like, an indie kind of show, Wild West kind of stuff. And that's where Cody belongs, right? You saw it within, his first two matches. You saw, oh, duh, this is why, this is where this kid belongs, because this is who he is.
Yep.
Look at the stock he comes from, So he's a realist. He knows how to tell the story. His dad was incredible at telling a story. His brother was insane about telling a story. It's like, this is the fit. And I think wrestlers who, and I know that WWE is now changing. There's a new regime, and and the programming is so much better. I actually can sit and watch it now.
Yeah.
That I would say that, I'm kind of glad Vince McMahon is kind of out of the picture, because it was really killing it for me. I couldn't even watch it. I would just be like, ugh, you know what I mean? Why would they do this? And I'm not like one of those, armchair bookers. I don't know what's better for the business. It's not, that's not my job. But as a fan, I would just be so completely turned off by it. But now I'm like watching it, and I'm just kind of going, this is, it feels like it's getting back to this place of what I remembered it being so great, why I remembered it being so great and falling in love with it. And I love Impact Wrestling. I think that's probably my second favorite, kind of TV show that's happening. I love the NWA Power Hour. I love, I got Fight TV. I consume wrestling. I love GCW, any kind of deathmatch stuff I'm into. So, and that's the thing now these days, is like, you can throw a rock and hit a wrestling company. You know what I mean? That's insane to me.
It's crazy. It's everywhere. And you mentioned about Cody. His stock has risen so much. He's the guy everybody's like, he should fight Roman Reigns at WrestleMania, if you can't get The Rock. So, I mean, that was like the ultimate thing, because Reigns is the guy right now. So anybody that people want to see wrestle him, especially WrestleMania, I mean, you're made in the shade big time. So Cody raised his stock so high right now. It's crazy. Like, people want to see him WrestleMania main event.
Well, I never was a Roman Reigns fan, and maybe it'll be like an Ultimate Warrior kind of thing. And maybe 10 years from now, I'll maybe look back and think he was something different than what I do now. It's nothing personal. It's just, I don't find a connection with him. Like, we don't have a connection. And that's what's most important to me. I had a connection with JYD, and I had a connection with the Rock and Roll Express. I had a connection with, obviously now with Cody, Punk, so many others, Rey Mysterio. Like, there's a connection there. For whatever reason, I just don't get that right now. I didn't get Braun Strowman for a while. And then all of a sudden I did, like out of the blue, and then he was gone. But same thing. It's like, there's certain things that just kind of, happen over time. You kind of start to see what everybody might be seeing, or you start to unsee what you thought was there. I don't know how to explain it, but just being a wrestling fan in today's world, I mean, we're at another golden age of wrestling. It's insane, like how much content there is out there.
It's crazy. WWE is on 7 hours a week. AEW is on 3 hours a week. They're saying ROH might get a TV deal.
I
There's
hope
all
so.
the streaming stuff, pro wrestling TV, fight TV. I mean, wrestling is crazy. It's really, I mean, it's everywhere. I mean, there's no way you can't avoid it. You know what I mean? You have to be able to find it somewhere.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you have so many streaming platforms. You have IWTV, you have Fight TV. The WWE is obviously on Peacock. Impact has an app. So you can find it anywhere, and it's not that hard to find it. New Japan, you can even see New Japan stuff here in America now, streaming. Yep. It's, so like the world is kind of the oyster for wrestling right now. So Um, it's really cool because then now you can follow. And I love, the fact that they brought an English like commentators and stuff like that to New Japan. Because now you can follow the storylines, and then you can follow the storylines over in Japan as it's like, so it's cool for someone who doesn't speak Japanese.
Yeah.
So,
I you can keep up with it. I love the Japanese stuff. You're talking about Masaba before. I always love Kawada, Kobashi, all those guys. Kenta, Marufuji. My favorite guy now, Okada. Love him. Feel like he's
Okada's
the best.
great.
Tanahashi is
Okada's great.
great.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many great Japanese pro wrestlers, and it's funny because I feel now when I go to this independent show, West Coast Pro, and they bring a lot of stars from New Japan, um, and they get a lot of like guys, from around the country, and the audience is definitely more shifted towards it. Like I almost feel like, even at indie shows, there's more like in Japan when you're at a wrestling show there, there's a build, right? And the way the audience engages is is completely different than American, let's say WWE audience, right? Or an AEW audience. There's not like he fucked up or whatever.
Yep.
But what I've seen now with the indie audience, it's more like the Japanese audience. They clap when a good move is or a good sequence or whatever it is, or if a buildup starts to happen, they respond to it like a Japanese audience. And I remember I was sitting there, the last show I was at, which was a couple weeks ago, and I was really starting to really notice it, like how people are responding. I was like, wow, I could be in Japan right now, because I think the fans are a lot more educated, and there's a lot more information out there about pro wrestling, Japanese pro wrestling. It's easier to access now. And so now people are starting to understand, and I don't know if it's like evolution as a wrestling fan, or if it's just, this is what we're supposed to do at a wrestling show. I don't know if that's part of it. Could be. But I feel like people have so many opportunities to learn about or to watch and understand different styles. It's not just like, oh, here's lucha, here's strong style, here's sports entertainment, here's indie-rific kind of shit. It's like I feel like a wrestling fan is going to watch a variety of different stuff now, and that's why I feel like they're way more intelligent about what's actually happening. And you're going to gravitate to what you like the most. I like stories and blood, and then don't just, cut yourself just for the sake of it, like going through a table and then running the ropes. Like, why are you bloody? What happened here? It should be, it should look like, if there's going to be blood in a match, it should look like, because this is a culmination of something,
It's got to mean something.
It's got to mean something. And because that's what's going to really attract me. And, the shock value, it's like, fuck, dude, I've seen more shocking shit, just walking out my front door, So it's like, if you get engaged with me emotionally and trap me there and get me at my heartstrings to pull, and then, you build that up, of course, I'm going to be more physically, mentally involved in that.
I feel like wrestling is one of the things too. You don't necessarily need to know the language, but you know what's going on. It's like a universal language is wrestling.
I think so. I feel like the great storytellers will always rise to the top. There will always be the ones, I feel like those who can't do it so well will always be sort of, they might get their moments, but then they'll go back, I feel like that's the crucial part. If you think about all the top kind of wrestling stars over the years, and even Hulk Hogan could tell a story.
Oh yeah.
It might have been a very short story, but it was a story nonetheless. And he could do it with his promos, And then the ring work was almost secondary, but yet made sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So, but he gets shit on, right? Because he only had 3 moves, or well, so you don't need more than that, right? If you know how to tell the story, you can do a clothesline and that's it. So, but if you look at all the people who have made real serious impacts in the business, they're all the ones that have been able to tell a story, and not only tell a story, but keep you engaged in it. So it's like you can do the spot fest, and like I said, that's all fine and good once in a card. But if you got a whole show that, I'm gonna flip it, because that's just not. I mean, it's kind of like black metal. Like I'm gonna listen to black metal every once in a while. But if I'm sitting there listening to black metal every single fucking day,
Yeah.
it's not gonna be like, I'm not gonna enjoy it as much. I'm actually gonna probably get farther away from it and burned out on it. So I don't know. I think it's an interesting time we live in, but there's so many different styles like we've been talking about that there's something for everybody, and that's pretty cool.
Definitely. And with Hogan, it's funny. I was working on a project, hopefully going to get it in the works. I was going through a ton of his matches, and I was trying to find between 84 and 93. I call it the Hogan era. Trying to find his best matches. I was up to like 150. But I wanted to cut it down to 100. It was crazy. I was like, wow, him and Harley Race in 87 had all these awesome matches in a row, which just weren't like you were seeing on TV. He's bloody. They're going through tables. I mean, crazy stuff. And you're like, wow, Terry Funk. Kamala, he's having good matches. Bad News Brown. Piper, obviously, earlier on, Orndorff. There's a million different guys. I mean, I think there's like 60 something guys, different wrestlers. I was like, man, he had good matches with them all. The crowd is nuts. I was like, man, he's so somehow underrated, underappreciated, because he was telling a story, a different one with each guy. It's crazy.
Right. Well, but if you think about where Hogan's learning curve, I mean, he learned in Florida, right?
Yep.
CWF. That's where he kind of cut his teeth. So he was getting trained by Graham, right? So it's like, they broke his leg or whatever, dislocated his whatever. I don't remember the whole story, but he comes back and he does it, and they discover him when he's playing in a band, right? I think didn't he play in a band?
Yeah. Yep.
So, and then the rest is kind of history. But I feel like guys who learned in Florida, I mean, we're talking about Dusty Rhodes, we're talking about Hulk Hogan, we're talking about, I mean, who else came from Florida? I think Lex Luger was down there. Not that Lex was like, I mean, whatever, however you want to feel about Lex, but he had some moments. But I feel like a lot of those, top superstars, if they went to Florida, you knew that they were legit, and you knew that they could go, and you knew that they could wrestle. And so if you're sat in opposite of a guy like Terry Funk or Harley Race, then you got to be sort of worth your salt. You might not be as great as they are, but if you're in there with them and you're able to put a cohesive match together, and I think you would have to be literally fucking the dumbest person in the world not to be able to with those guys. Like, you got to have some sort of talent. And Hulk Hogan was the rock star, and he was exactly what Vince needed at that time. And I feel like he knew what he was doing getting in there. I mean, he had all that experience up in the AWA. I mean, the first time I ever clocked him, he was in the AWA.
Yep.
And wasn't he the Incredible, or he was Incredible Hulk, right?
Yep.
I think originally.
Yep.
And then it's kind of like guys like Vader, or what was his name? The baby bull. What was this? Leon White.
Leon White,
yeah,
the baby bull. Yeah.
I mean, Scott Hall, AWA. So I mean, if you had the learning curve of championship wrestling from Florida and the AWA with Vern Gagne, you got to know what you're doing. You can't not know how to do a headlock. You can't not know how to lock up. You can't not, what I'm saying? So it's like to shit on Hulk Hogan just because he did 5 moves and, is what it is. You can't do that. It's not a fair assessment, where he learned and what he did with what he learned. It shows me how smart and really talented he really was.
Yes.
Right. So, but that's enough about Hulk.
I think the great Piper line about Hulk was, "I was fighting in the streets while you were playing at Tootsie's Bar and Grill."
See, Piper, man, I mean, that's a whole other can of worms that you could just go down for hours talking about how great and how much of an impact he had. I
Did you
mean,
see
even
the
on today's,
documentary
what's
on
that?
Piper? Sorry to cut you off. Did you see the documentary with Piper on A&E?
Which, I don't think I've watched those yet.
Ah,
They're on my bucket list. I was watching The Dark Side of the Ring for a little bit, and then I watched Tales from the Territories, which is incredible.
yep, awesome.
And I'm only on the first episode, the Memphis stuff on the Tales from the Territories. I'm kind of working my way through. I'm a dad too, so it's like kids, and then whatever. But yeah, so I've over the years I've read a lot of books, and especially when it comes to wrestling. My favorite all-time wrestling book is obviously Mick Foley's very first book. I thought that was insanely good. Probably the best written wrestling book I've ever read. Jim Cornette's put out some really great books too. But as far as like, historical books. But yeah, I mean, Piper it was an anomaly. And to see like what he was able to do in all the different territories and how he would pop those territories or become the number one heel in those territories, like, and then getting the shot with the WWF and he was also part of the reason why there was, and he doesn't get enough credit. A lot of people put it on Hulk Hogan, and it's like, well, there was also Cyndi Lauper, and there was also Rowdy Piper. And I would have to say, I think Wendy Richter, and I mean, what also you got to give credit to Moolah. I mean, there were so many players there to make that company, but it wouldn't have happened without a Rowdy Piper, and the heat with Mr. T. Like, they knew how to do it. Piper was a sound professional, and I got nothing but love for him,
Love it. The documentary is really cool because his daughters, I guess, and his wife, they gave his books. He used to write quotes, and they would find like the machine gun quote and different things.
Oh, wow.
So he was practicing his lines. So you would think because he was so natural, it came from the top of his head. They said no, he would go in front of the mirror. He'd write it down. Then you'd see cross off like he didn't like a line. So it was like he really thought about wrestling 24/7, but he
Wow.
studied his lines, and you were like, wow, he's so quick witted. He knew what he was going to say, and if you reacted, he was going to go with a different line. Like so, he was so like smart and ahead of the curve. But his daughters and his wife were saying like he was like studied, made it like his Bible study. Like, I'm gonna do this quote, I'm gonna say this line, and I'm gonna hit it here, there. If they go this way, I'll go this way. And he crossed off stuff he didn't like, he added stuff he did like. Really cool to look at that notebook.
Wow, that's super awesome. I did not, maybe I did know something a little bit about that from his book, but I mean, it makes perfect sense to me, because as a musician, like, you got to remember lyrics, right? And you got to remember lines, and and certain things. Like, I'm always thinking before I step foot on the stage, where am I? When's the last time we were here? What happened? Because you're always wanting to be relatable. He just wanted to be a dick. So it's like, you know what I mean? But then also have the, another line ready for, well, what if he reacts this way? So it just shows you how great wrestlers are. They're the best one take actors in the world. I mean, really, at the end of the day, it's like to be able to not only riff, it's like old comedians. It's like recording on tape as a musician before Pro Tools. You had to know your shit. You had to go in there and you had to be good and you had to be precise. There wasn't, oh, we can just punch it and then boom, boom, boom and build it. It's like you had to know what you were doing. You had to be rehearsed. There the things that people lean on now, sort of almost, even though they are time efficient and, can it be helpful? They sort of taken the spontaneity out of the creativity, because I know there are some musicians out there that know, oh, well, we got Pro Tools, so I'll just kind of, it's like with Rancid, it's like we're so precise because of all those years of recording on tape. It's like we practice something once or twice. By the third time we have it, and then we move on. If it's a new song or whatever it is, and very rarely is it chopped up and put together. It's like, this is how it is. This boom, 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 and but that to me, it makes perfect sense because, Piper was obviously one of the best, if not the best heel, I would say. I mean, who, who else is there? Think about it.
Flair and Piper.
Well, but Flair was almost like an anti-hero in a lot of ways. He was like a Stone Cold,
He got cheered a lot. Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, like Flair, he was like one of probably the first anti-hero in a weird way. I can't really say that Flair was a out and out heel. I think he had his moments of out and out heel, but Piper was, when he was a heel, there was no guessing, like, what I'm saying? Like Flair, he was always, he was almost too arrogant to be just a straight heel, and he was also a good looking, flamboyant guy. Right. So it's like, you kind of hate him, but you kind of are sort of, seduced by him in a weird way.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I guess we'll wind it down here. I could probably talk to you about wrestling all day, all night, but
Oh,
we'll wind it down. We'll head towards the finish just for,
well, I'll come back anytime.
All right. Awesome. Yeah, I was going to say, perfect. That's great. I'll definitely have you back because, man, this is great talking wrestling with you because I love famous people that love wrestling, love what I love and obviously great musicians, great talent. But what's next for you? What do you got coming down the pike?
Well, at this point, Rancid's got a record in the can. We'll be out on tour over in Europe next year. I've been doing this thing on this app called Whatnot as of recent, where I'm selling a lot of my personal stuff, and it's at like an auction format. So it's wrestling toys, records, action figures, t-shirts, stage worn gear, all kinds of stuff. So I've been doing that as of recent, because I'm trying to clear out a lot of my stuff. Like I have too much. Like if I just showed you right now around this room, it's much like yours that you're in right now.
My wife hates it. Yeah.
And now I'm kind of narrowing it down to like, I'm just like, now it's just like, getting my Bret Harts together, and just, my old lady promised me these shelves like 3 Christmases ago, and she just got them for me like 2 weeks ago. So now I'm taking like all of my wrestling figures. Like I have a bunch of LJNs. Oh, check out this Piper. This is pretty sick. This is a custom Piper that a friend of mine did. It's got an Old Firm Casuals t-shirt on. It's an old
nice.
LJN.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So, I'm getting a lot of my stuff together, and like the stuff I'm keeping, I'm displaying finally. And so all the stuff that I don't want anymore, I'm just going to get rid of. And I figured, why not do it through this Whatnot thing? And it's a pretty cool site. It's basically a live streaming auction kind of site. And then I've got, stuff I've been selling on my one of my Instagram pages. I have like a little store where I sell, t-shirts and also kind of, same kind of thing. So right now I'm just kind of in a big clearing of the house, like, get this stuff out of here. Let's make a deal. Like just, get it out of here kind of thing, And so that's kind of what I've been up to. Obviously when I can play music, I do it. I just got home from a little run I did with my solo thing over in England not too long ago. So yeah, I mean, that was in the summertime. And so now I'm just trying to be dad. I'm spending a lot of time with the kids. And like I said, it's my youngest. He just turned 11 yesterday. So, big party this weekend and dealing with teenagers. And I'm kind of, pretty happy just kind of being at home for once. I mean, I was on the road for 30 plus years. So, and also do this podcast called The Wrestling Perspective. And we bring, it's kind of a weekly show. It airs on Fight TV and on our YouTube channel. And we bring, wrestlers on there from all promotions. We haven't gotten anybody from the WWE yet, but maybe that will change. But we had guys like Kurt Angle. We've had CM Punk, Ruby Soho. Trying to think, so many others. Tommy Dreamer. We've had, Bully Ray on there. We've had, so many different ones. Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of a fun little thing that we do. and it's more of a fan's perspective. We talk about, current states of wrestling. We talk about their careers. It's more of like, it's like a shoot, just more kind of, not so much what kind of we're doing. It's a little bit different, but it's still fun nonetheless. You get to talk to some of your favorite wrestlers. We've had MJF on there where he just came in and insulted us the whole time, which was pretty funny. But yeah, so it's a pretty cool thing. It keeps me connected, and I get to ask a bunch of wrestlers my favorite questions. Like what I really want to know about them, and it's not like you're typical like kind of guy in his mom's basement kind of thing. So, which is nothing wrong with that, but just it's more of it's just more fun, and I think that the wrestlers enjoy it, and the guys that come on enjoy it, and we just have a little fun with it because we're fans. At the end of the day, it's like I'm a fan of pro wrestling. I love what this is. I love this form of entertainment, and yeah, I mean, I'll be watching it till the day I die.
Crazy, like just in general, it's like, okay, Lars is like an LA guy, I'm a New Jersey guy, but
No, I'm a San Francisco guy.
well, I'm sorry, I was thinking West Coast, San Francisco guy. Like I'm a New Jersey guy, but I'm buddies with Phil, like you mentioned. I know Rob Miller pretty well. I know Dennis, your partner. I know him pretty well. So it's funny. It's like, man, wrestling is bringing everything together here. Interesting though, very weird.
Yeah, well,
in a
but
good
it's
way.
cool.
Yeah,
It's
in a good
cool.
way.
I mean, yeah, I remember when I first met Rob. Like he came to a show. Oh, it must have been about 10 years ago, 12 years ago now. But like, not meeting somebody for the first time, and I remember like Will, it was Good Helmet on the board.
Oh yeah.
He was living down in Texas, and uh, Punk was doing a pay-per-view in San Antonio, and it was funny because he just was world heavyweight champion, and literally a month later he's doing a dark match against R-Truth for this pay-per-view. So we go to the show, and he really wants to watch the UFC fight, so we all go back over to Will's house, and so it's me, Punk, Will, and his family, and we're all watching the UFC, eating pizza. And it's like, these are the kinds of moments that that you want to have, and but it's all good. It's like there's no weirdness. We're all just wrestling fans, and we're watching the UFC because we all like MMA, so we're all kind of communicating there too. But I mean, that's the beautiful thing about this community. It's like I said, you kind of instantly know somebody just because if you've been a fan for more than 10 years, at some point, you're going to have dealt with something that I've dealt with as a fan, right? So there's a commonality, there's a connection.
Yep.
And I love it. And I love to talk about pro wrestling. It's my favorite thing other than punk rock. I probably know more about pro wrestling than I do about punk rock. I dare I say,
Wow, that's high praise there. Very historian like of you. Yeah.
Well, I feel like that's I've always history, like as in school and stuff, history was always like my favorite and best subjects, and I loved collecting and archiving. I love doing that. And I do that with punk rock music and stuff. But pro wrestling, like I said, it's always going to be, punk rock and pro wrestling kind of came in at the same time for me, and sort of opened up my eyes and brought me to totally different worlds, and just the outlawness of pro wrestling was fit my attitude with the outlawness of the punk rock stuff. So it made perfect sense for me to so when I look back at my life and think about what the most consistent things have ever been, and it's been punk and pro wrestling straight up, like I've loved bands that have gone, and maybe Motorhead. I'll say Motor. I can throw in GBH in those categories too. But so many things. I mean, my relationship with pro wrestling has lasted 2 marriages. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, both marriages not understanding that I love it. My new current girlfriend will watch it with me, so that's even better.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, my wife absolutely hates it. She doesn't get it. She just doesn't understand. But my son likes it though. So
Well, then there you go. I mean, there's that connection. You know what I mean? It's like I remember when I brought Soren to the pay per view in Vegas when we played, my youngest, and he's in a room and he's hanging out with his Uncle Punk and Ace and Dax, and and I can't say who else was in that room, but there was a few others. And he's just like, and they're all paying attention to him, and he's just talking to him. And then April, Punk's wife, is talking to him about Bakugan or whatever it is, Dragon Ball Z or whatever.
yep.
And it's like you realize this is like a very family friendly, community orientated thing that's happening. And just to see Soren be part of that and be involved in the like just the questions he would ask, and then how gracious they were with him. And, just to watch him interact with that and really find like kind of a kinship with guys that he's only, and women who's only seen on TV. You know what I mean? And it's kind of it's a crazy trip, when you're in there and you're with some of your heroes, or guys that you admired in their wrestling careers, and then they're throwing your son around playing wrestling with them. You know what I mean? So
Yep.
it's cool. It's very cool.
My son likes the old school stuff. I mean, he loves The Rock. He's obsessed with The Rock, the eyebrow, the whole thing. He's obsessed. So I said, because he knows I love Hulk. He thinks like I'm obsessed with Hulk, which I really am. He goes, did they ever wrestle? And I was like, you know what they did? So I put on WrestleMania 18.
Oh,
And I'm telling him that Hulk never loses. Because we watched WrestleMania 3, and he's like, "There's no way he's beating this giant." I'm like, "Watch," and then he beats Andre. He hated Andre because he's scary and he fell on Hogan.
sure.
So, but then he goes, "There's no way Hulk beats The Rock." And I go, "Oh, you want to bet?" I go, "Let's watch this one." I go, "Because Hulk never loses." Just playing it up to him. He's like half paying attention, half paying attention. All of a sudden, Hulk hits a leg drop. I go, "Told you, it's over." And The Rock kicked out, and then he's like fully invested, and he was fully into it, going crazy. And then The Rock, then Hogan kicks out, and like he's like, what? Like he didn't know what was going to happen, and then Hulk lost. He goes, oh, I can't believe Hulk really lost. So then he loved it even more, and now he likes. And I had to buy him a Rock action figure, all this other stuff, just because he's like, I can't believe Hulk lost. And he's like, you told me he never loses. I was like, I guess The Rock is better. He's like, I guess so. It's like that's why I love The Rock. So I just think it's so funny. It's like even generational, you can
Yeah.
make it with wrestling.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I remember that match in particular. Just talking about it made the hair on my arm stand
Yeah,
up.
me too.
It's just the way that when they're in the beginning and they're just both looking in, like this, and I mean, it's going. You can feel the energy, and that energy is sustained, and it only goes up, but it never goes below that peak.
Yep.
At all. And that's the story. That's the craziness of it all.
And it was
But
awesome roller coaster too, because it's like Rock kicks out, that Hogan kicks out. Like it's great.
I mean, it was definitely probably one of the most entertaining matches that will go down. I think that's up there, like with Taker throwing Foley off the cage. That's up there with me, just with the intensity, and the excitement. Like, oh my God, like what? Like the way that your heart goes up, I mean, in totally completely different ways, but it's the same thing. It's the same heartstring that's being played. It's just being played in a completely different way, but it's just as intense. So
it's funny with wrestling too, like the rest of the card. I mean, there's Flair, Undertaker. I mean, there's good matches, but like that match is like, oh man, you get like such a rush, and then and then once it's over, it's like, but that's only certain guys, certain matches that you get that.
100%, totally agree. Well, listen, I will come back and do this.
Where can everybody find you, like social media wise?
Well, anything with the blue check. So I'm on Twitter at Roots Radicals 01, I think it is. I'm on Instagram, just Lars Frederiksen. If it's got a blue check next to it, that's where I'm at. Laz's Locker, which is my store on Instagram. You can find me on Whatnot right now currently. You can I'm doing another show on the 12th of November where I'm going to be live auctioning a lot of toys, records, signed, autograph stuff from the archives. Let's see where else. Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of on Facebook, but I really, it's a little too toxic for me, so I just kind of stay away from that. But yeah, and I think that's all the social platforms I'm on. Or you can see me at your local 7-Eleven. You never know.
Lars, thank you so much for all the time. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.